Episode 39. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is Anthony Chaney. Anthony, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Hey, Vic. Thanks for having me.
Anthony, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Sure. It was back in 1997. I got into security out here in the state of California. And over the years, I've done many advanced forms of training for security, including law enforcement training, anti-terrorism, and other specialized related security stuff involving doing security. And then after that, it was about 2013 in April, I retired and went on to doing photography and book writing.
Please tell us about the nature of your work and why someone who does what you do might be more concerned with dogmen than most people.
You know, that's a very good question. When I did security, I wasn't like your typical mall guard. I did advanced tactical nature type work involving being out in the woods, river bottoms, orchard, basically patrolling levees, river bottoms. So there was just some interesting things that you come across when you're out in the woods in areas that are not accessible to the public. Some of these places are pretty private.
Now that you know that they're out there, did you ever consider giving up that line of work for something that's going to keep you away from the woods?
I continued on for about 2 years, but I was on edge. You know, having that knowledge of something that exists when you never thought it did, you know, it opens up your eyes and you kind of begin to know what to look for and stuff when you're out in the woods and stuff. So I kept my eyes open and just really paid attention to my surroundings. One of the things I would do is get on Google Maps and check out the area. Always show up 30 minutes early to work to relieve the other guy to find out if anything's happened at the site, and also to kind of scan the area for anything out of place.
It sounds like even though you had that encounter and you know as a result that dogmen are out there, that you were still able to do your job, but were there any negative side effects as a result of that, as far as you being able to effectively do your job?
Yeah, actually, I was on edge. I was very jumpy. You know, like I hear something moving the bushes or in the woods, and, you know, I would just be pretty jumpy about it and stuff. You know, sometimes my partners asked if I was all right, and I was like, well, you didn't hear that? And they're like, no. And they're like, it's probably just an animal. I'm like, well, you could say that. That was probably just an animal, but what kind of animal? You know, you just don't know what's out in these woods.
Yeah, I'd say just an animal doesn't really cut it, does it?
No, because, you know, like I said before, you never really know what's out there, especially the type of animal. I mean, especially when we got like a mountain lion or bobcats just 30 feet to 100 yards away from you. You're just walking by in the dark. Coyotes were a big thing. You know, you could be out there standing with binocs for night vision, looking around, and suddenly you hear something behind you. You turn around and a coyote creeping up on you, and you're like, okay, time to get back into the patrol car.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good at all. Were you into monsters as a kid?
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of ironic because one of the biggest monsters I like to watch in movies was werewolves. You know, where it's the whole classical idea that humans can transform into a werewolf. So I was pretty big on that.
Well, I don't think that would make you any different than most people. A lot of us were into monsters like that when we were young. Fortunately, most of us haven't had an encounter with what you saw that one night. As far as that encounter goes, we're going to get into that in just a few here. Before we do, though, I want to ask you, before you and your son had your encounters, how would you have reacted if a friend, for example, came up to you and told you about an encounter that they had had with the Dogman?
That's a good question. I've actually had people come up to me before, maybe not dealing with a Dogman, but I've had people tell me, some weird things they would see, and I didn't pass it off or become skeptical. I just kind of kept an open mind about it and asked a couple of questions, to try to find out or figure out, just from a scientific point of view, or to find out if there was any other plausible reason that it is what they had seen.
One thing I noticed in our conversations that we had leading up to this show is you use the term werewolf instead of Dogman. Is that because you think there's a form of shape-shifting element to these things, or what?
I guess the reason I termed the word werewolf is because when I seen what I had seen, it's like exactly what I would see in the movie like The Howling, but a little bit different. But when I say werewolf, it's not like I mean a human that could change into a werewolf. There's just something very odd about it. I was like, this is a real creature, a real animal of some sort that's probably in that shape or form all the time, day or night. I didn't really believe that in the concept of a human changing into a werewolf, other than like in Hollywood. You see the movies.
That makes sense. In 2011, you had an encounter. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I was just working up in Chico. It was a Saturday night. It was covering a specialized dance club, doing armed security with about 5 other partners. We had to check people out the front for any guns. And we've had people coming in with guns, and we had to turn them around. It's like, you don't need a gun at a dance club. And plus, we live in California with these harsh gun laws. But it was around, I want to say 1:30 in the morning that we finally broke away from that dance club and were able to head home. And since I lived in Marysville at the time, and my partners lived in Yuba City, I took the route to go through Oroville to get to Marysville. And what happened was, I'm on the highway. It's around 3:30 a.m. And as I'm driving on the highway, there's like no other cars because it's 3:30 in the morning, Sunday now. And I looked off to my right because I seen movement, like next to a road sign. If I recall, there was a road sign, and it was pretty tall. But there's something standing next to it. And I got to the point, since there was no cars on the highway, it was just myself, I slowed down to like 25 miles per hour. I'm looking at this werewolf or Dogman, and this thing's like 9-10 feet tall, just standing there looking at me. And I don't think it liked the fact that I noticed it. It probably could tell that I noticed it because I slowed down to the point where I stopped. But just as I was getting ready to stop, the Dogman turns around, walks for about 7 or 8 feet into this field, drops to all fours, and then it quickly ran through the field, but midway, it stopped slightly enough to turn around to look at me. And when it was on all fours is when I got most of the features out of it, the light-colored fur. It was like light tan, medium brown, just kind of blended. And what was scary was that its fur color would match with the color of the field, like the weeds, the tan and the browns and stuff. So at first it was kind of where somebody that wasn't paying attention could easily have missed it when it was standing next to the sign. They would have just kept driving on. But I have pretty good night vision, 20/20 vision, and it's like I said, when it was standing there next to the sign, I caught the movement of the creature. Like I said, I just watched it drop to all fours, run through the field, and it cleared it. It was so fast. It was very muscular. and it was making a beeline towards a tree line at the other side of the field. And behind that field is the Yuba River, and on the other side of that river is the Oroville Wildlife Management Area. And it's only a day-use area only. You have to get a special permit from the California Highway Patrol to be out there at night to, like, camp. And for some reason, we have a lot of WMAs, or specifically wildlife management areas around here that are just day-use only. And they have the woods or some source of water, like a creek or a river, running through it stuff. And there's a lot of deer, coyotes, bobcats. But it's just really creepy to see this thing, and let alone its height. I mean, just seeing it at 9 to 10 feet tall, and just so muscular. It had like long fur. I mean, it was still kind of winter, it being in February. So it was really cold out that night. But I just knew if this Dogman creature could easily have run towards my car and flipped it over. I mean, that's how intimidated I was when I seen it. So, and it's, my first pretty much sighting of that.
When you rolled up on that Dogman, at your closest, how close were you?
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. I'm sorry. I was to the point where I was just, let's see, guesstimate here. About 50, 60 feet away.
50 to 60 feet.
Yeah, 50, 60 feet away. And like I said, what I noticed, it was trying to stand still next to that sign, like it didn't want to be seen. Because, like I said, when I came to a stop, it was looking at me, and then it just nonchalantly just turned around, nice and casually, walked about 7 or 8 feet, and that's when I got creeped out even more, is when it dropped to all fours. And now when it was running through the field, another thing that creeped me out about it was the way it was shifting as it ran. It was like shifting, and the only thing it kind of reminded me of was the movie American Werewolf in London, the way they showed that creature on all fours, and the way its legs just like shifted like that. And another thing I noticed is when it was on all fours, was the height of its back would be at the level of my Chevy Malibu at that time. So it was pretty tall even on all fours.
That paints a pretty scary picture right there. If you were 50 to 60 feet from that thing at your closest distance, that's close enough to get an idea of any facial expressions it might have had. Did you say that it did at one point look directly at you?
Well, what happened was, when I was looking at it while I was standing, I seemed to be locked in on its face more. As I was looking at its face, it was like, I don't know, it was just weird. The eyes, just the way it was looking at me, it startled me. And that was just a few seconds. I want to say about, I had a good 8 seconds to process and determine what it was I was really looking at, just standing there and being so tall, standing next to this, I believe the height of the sign was about 7 or 8 foot. But the most detailed features it got is when it went to all fours, because that's when it really hit me. And I really started paying attention to what I was really looking at. And that's when for some odd reason, is when I noticed the head, the face more. Especially when it looked at me. I didn't like that. It was really creepy when it just looked back at me when I got halfway through the field. But it had a long snout. I want to say about 6 to 8 inches long. And I could see the pointy ears. And the weird thing is I don't recall a tail, if it had a tail or not. For some odd reason, I just can't remember that or even factor that part in. It's like it didn't have a tail, but yet I'm wondering if it did. I was just so focused on the head and then the shoulders and its arms when it was running on all fours.
Well, I don't think anyone could blame you for not noticing certain details. You had to be in shock seeing something like that. Wow, that had to be one heck of a sight there. You didn't mention the leg structure, at least. I don't believe you mentioned the leg structure that you saw. Did it have canine-type legs or more hominid-style legs?
Oh, of course. No, it wasn't hominid. It was bipedal when it was standing. It was capable of walking. But on all fours, that's when I noticed the legs, because when it was standing, I couldn't notice the legs because of the weeds were so tall. They're about we get weeds out here that could get up to 6 feet tall. But these weeds were about 3 feet tall, so I just didn't pay attention to the legs really. And there were some construction cones out there too, kind of lining up the edge of the highway. But yeah, it was just, I noticed the legs when it was on all four, and the legs were like that of like a German Shepherd. It was like on the pads of its, I guess its feet or paws, however you want to term that. So I could see how it could stand up. And what I noticed, it wasn't hunched in the upper back area. It was pretty much standing erect. I can't say him. I don't even know. It could have been a female. It makes you wonder, especially if other people are seeing these things, there must be populations of them.
Not an easy sight to get out of your mind. Moving on, Anthony, your son also had an encounter of his own. Please tell us about what happened to him.
Oh, yeah. It was 2012. I was doing the orchards and stuff like that. And so I kind of like to bring up the subject about what I had seen, the Dogman, during the previous year. My second oldest son was visiting me at the time and stuff, and he overheard me talking to my current wife about at the time I said werewolf. And my son, his head pops over and looks at me, and he interrupts, and he says, "Dad, there's something I got to tell you about. I was afraid to tell any adult." And I'm like, "Okay, what's up, son? You can talk to me." He tells me that over in Olivehurst, where he lived at the time, there's a big field beyond the backyard, and it's dark back there at night. He says he goes out into the garage. He had like 3 or 4 dogs. 2 of them were really big. They were huddled together inside the garage and shaking, but they were silent. They weren't whining, growling, or barking or anything. And they were staring straight off at the side door, not the big garage door, but the side door, which went right to the side yard, and you could see the 6-foot fence. He said he steps in, and looking at his dogs, he looks over at the side door. The door's open, and he was in there to do some laundry at the time. As he's looking at the side door that's open, he sees this black furred with like dog-like legs shaped figure walk right past the side door on the outside. Curious, he's thinking, wondering what it was he just seen. So he kind of walks over towards the big garage door area to where at an angle he could look out the side door, and then kind of walks up to it and peeks out the side door. He's like in the doorway now looking out. And he's like, "Dad, what I saw was a black furred werewolf." It went up to the 6-foot fence, and it just placed its hands on top of the fence and easily stepped over it. And it went into the field behind our house. Well, I had my son go up to my 6-foot wooden fence at my house, and I did like a measurement thing with my hand, kind of like what Bobo does on that show, Finding Bigfoot. We came up to the measurement that this creature he saw was 8 feet tall.
That had to be one heck of an eye-opener for him. You had your encounter already by this time, and I'm sure he believed you when you told him about what you had seen, but there's nothing like seeing one for yourself.
Well, it was disturbing to me when he told me that, because one, he was sincere, even though I spent many months after of drilling him over and over again about it, because I wanted to make sure. The reason I said it was disturbing to me is because when I seen what I seen, the Dogman werewolf back in February 2011, and then this happened to him sometime in 2011, I think in summertime, he said it's when it happened. So this is like months after my sighting. It's the fact that disturbs me is that I was wondering if this thing caught my scent and somehow just decided to follow me home or track me down, because I go over there to pick up my son at the time, when he would come and visit and stuff. He lives with me now. But at the time, I would go over there and visit, and it just made me wonder, okay, this Dogman I see back in February 2011, if it's big and tall like that and muscular and furry, and then this thing has the full capability of having not just excellent sight, even at night, but good at smelling, scent detection. But I was kind of relieved in a way because he said this creature was black-furred, and had the snout and the ears, and it was like a German Shepherd-like head and stuff. Is the description he gave me with dog-like legs. So when he said it was black-furred, I'm like, okay, it's not the one I've seen, which I've seen a light-colored fur. But then again, I'm like, well, that light-colored fur Dogman I've seen was 10 foot. What if that was the alpha sending a beta male out to do its bidding or something like that? I don't know. These are just questions that just plagued me and just never had the answers for. And with my background in law enforcement training and anti-terrorism training and tactical security and doing armed security work and all that stuff, you got to think tactfully in those kinds of situations, and nothing's ever considered stupid reasoning because you'd be surprised when stupid things happen, So you take everything into consideration. You spend some time thinking about such things, especially when you've seen one, and you're like, wow, these things really exist. Soon after my sighting, I did research about it and stuff, but I'm just glad I had that kind of investigative training to kind of consider the outcome, or especially the possibilities of what these things are capable in doing, especially when you got one of your children, one of your teenage sons telling you that they just saw a werewolf in the backyard climbing over the fence or stepping over it and going into a dark field. Matter of fact, I brought up Google Maps because I'm so used to the idea of living next to a city that I forget that I'm really in like a suburban, rural farmland type setting. And as I look at Google Maps of where I live and where he lives, there's nice portions of fields that lead from the foothills and the mountains in the east coming down into Olivehurst and then heading towards the river bottoms just west of me. Because, we live right next door to the levee, and on the other side of the levee is Walnut Orchards and the river. And I'm like, this thing could easily, with that height and strength, could easily maneuver in the dark at night around people's homes through these fields and get to more human-populated areas. With my house, I went and bought a center light and replaced the patio light with some halogen bulbs and stuff, so I had better lighting because I have a small field next to me. So with tactical training and stuff, I pretty much took my home and kind of made it to where pretty defensive. And that's how it's affected me too.
As if it wasn't bad enough for you to have that first encounter, to get that phone call and find out about what he had seen. That just takes it over the top. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Less than a week ago, while at a place called Sutter Buttes, you had a scare. What happened?
Oh, yeah, that was not cool at all. Yeah, I do photography, and I just got into starting of doing astrophotography. It's basically where you just take your Nikon or Canon DSLR Pro camera and just a simple lens. By the way, I'm using a Nikon 18 to 55 millimeter kit lens that it came with, and I set it to infinity, which you have to do a certain thing with it to do that. We headed out to the Buttes, the Sutter Buttes. It pretty much presses on a small town called Sutter. We're on Pass Road. We pull over off into the gravel on the side of the road, and it's dark out there. It's like a quarter moon or almost half moon, and it's just a beautiful night scenery. Excited about getting some nice astrophotography shots with the camera. I get about 6 photographs in, but during that time, my son, he keeps looking behind us. See, our car's next to a barbed wire fence, and on the other side of the barbed wire fence, it's a hill that runs up for about 200 feet, and you're at the top already. But he kept noticing something as I was doing pictures, and as it is, I'm trying to get over my fear of going out in the dark, out into the rural areas, the foothills and the woods, because I spent almost 2 years of not going out from my house since I retired from doing the armed security type work in April 2013. From 2013 on up until last week, I finally just started getting out. But before that time, and during that time, I wouldn't go out. I was just too afraid. So as we're out there on Pass Road in the Buttes, my son's like, "Dad, are there boulders out here on the hills?" I'm like, "No, not that I'm aware of." "Are there cows?" I'm like, "Yeah, there's cows, but they're not over here. They're like more that way," pointing towards the eastern hills and stuff. He's like, "Okay, Dad." Well, I get my 7th or 6th photograph in of the stars and the moon and the Sutter Buttes and the hills, and all of a sudden we hear this growl. I could try to mimic it. It was like it let out a breath. It was like it was loud and creepy. And I stopped. I looked up, let go of the camera. I looked over at my son, and my son at the same time says, "Dad, did you just hear that growl?" I'm like, "Yes." And then we hear this car coming, and I took that time to get my tripod legs folded up as this car just started passing us. And we quickly got into the car, and we got out of there. And my son is so afraid that he started having an anxiety attack. But he was like, "Dad, I'm having Tourette's. I'm having a Tourette's attack." I'm like, "You mean an anxiety attack?" He's like, "No, Dad, Tourette's attack." He was that scared. He didn't realize what he was saying. He meant to say anxiety attack, but he was saying Tourette's attack. Tourette's syndrome is where you like tick, or you cuss a lot in some rare cases. But we pulled off into the ballpark parking lot in Sutter, where I used to hang out at night when I was a teenager, because I used to live in Sutter. And I used to go up into those Sutter Buttes by myself in the dark back in 1993 when I first moved to the town Sutter. I was all by myself, and I went up there. The only weird thing that's ever happened to me was the first night I went up to the Buttes. I was standing before the Sutter Butte with the blinking tower on top. I took my mountain bike out there, and I climbed the barbed wire fence, and I went up for about 3 hills. Well, I'm sitting out there in the dark looking at the stars. I heard like mechanical voices, but it was so dark I couldn't see. What I didn't realize was that at the time, Beale Air Force Base, which is right next door to Olivehurst, I guess they had soldiers out there with night vision, and they were surrounding me, and I didn't know it. And they were like hiding in the dark because I started making out movement, but they kept their distance. And next you know, from the top of Sutter Butte, a black military helicopter with the spotlight already on flew straight down towards me. They were circling above my head, and inside the cockpit was a red light. And the guy that was sitting in the back was holding a very big assault rifle with a nice big scope on it. But over the PA system, the pilot told me I need to get out of there. It's not safe. You see, I didn't know there was an old missile silo out there in the Buttes. And I guess they were cleaning up the lead at the time, back in 93, 94, because there was all these green and black military helicopters flying out towards Sutter Buttes from Beale Air Force Base at the time. And I just didn't know it because I was new to the town. That was the only weird thing that happened to me out in the Buttes. But when I got into town and started making friends and stuff, I was like, hey, let's go up to the Buttes. And they're like, don't go up there. I'm like, why? I'm like, I go up there all the time by myself. And they're like, are you serious? They're like, don't go up there. And they're telling me about little people, UFOs, which eventually I started seeing and discovering what they were talking about. Now, the Sutter County Sheriff deputies did talk about, I guess, what had happened, and this is where the so-called little people come into play. A Sutter County Sheriff deputy, and they don't like to talk about this to outsiders, this is something they would whisper at the sheriff's office, amongst each other, as I would learn and stuff later when I got into law enforcement training stuff. But one of the sheriff's deputies was driving through the Sutter Buttes and had stopped because he saw what he said, I guess, was like a little alien man, bald and wearing some weird type suit. And he ran up the hill very fast, like no human could do. So that was just one of the rumors and weird stuff that you would hear about. And also this like witch's graveyard. Honestly, I think that was some kind of tourist attraction type setup that somebody started. That's a different subject. But anyways, my son and I, we pull off into the ballpark parking lot where I used to hang out when I was a teenager in this town, Sutter. And I looked at him and had to sit there and calm him down. And he mimicked the growl. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I heard. And he's like, Dad, I want to go home. I don't want to even be in this town. And so we drove back into Olivehurst.
What a strange night, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and it really upsetted me because I really don't want to be influenced by the fear of when I seen the Dogman. I want to be able to go out. I'm a wildlife photographer. And, I publish books of my creative photography that I do, and I'm just trying to break past that and just still get out to enjoy the great outdoors. But when my kids go with me, I'm on high alert. I just don't want something to happen to my kid. Matter of fact, there was something I didn't mention before. I didn't get to do this location. I can't say exactly where it was because I'm still under a 3-year confidential security clearance contract I had signed. Basically, all I could say was 15 minutes north of Sacramento. And it was a levee on a river. My partner had found out, and he called me and told me about it. But apparently, this mom and dad got upset with their, I believe it was 8-year-old kid. They drove out to this levee river area. And it's all open fields and everything. What happened was they dropped off their kid as a form of punishment and left him there in the dark. They came back 15 minutes later, and they couldn't see the boy. They called out, and I guess what happened was they had sheriff come out and everything, and the dogs would not move. They would not track down the scent of the boy, nothing. These dogs would not budge an inch. And that was a weird story that my partner had told me about that had happened in that area. And these things are the type of stuff we learn. I mean, like the type of tactical work we're doing, we're crawling in the dirt out in like walnut orchards, catching walnut thieves using night vision or binoculars. And we got sheriff deputies that come down there to hook up a suspect that we already arrested and take him off to jail. And the sheriff deputies tell us, they've told us numerous occasions, they're like, we would never do the type of work you guys do. It's just too creepy. Sitting out here in the orchards in the dark at night. They didn't like it. They liked sitting in their patrol cars, navigating the streets of the cities that they're hired to protect and keep the peace in. But they gave us credit. The agency I worked for had a lot of respect with the local law enforcement in Yuba and Sutter counties, and they still do. They have a very good reputation. And with Butte County.
It sounds like a really creepy area, so I can't say I blame the deputies for feeling that way. You told me that a lieutenant you worked for has a family member who had an encounter. What did he see?
I could be pretty frank about things and straightforward. Matter of fact, I've always had my bosses tell me that I'm too honest to be doing the type of work I do. And I'm like, okay, whatever that means, well, then you need me more. I guess that's why they always told me I was their best officer, and they still stand by that today. But what happened was this was the company I was working for at the time. We wore all black BDUs, and we were doing like gigs on the weekends and stuff. It was the time I saw the Dogman when I was just doing the gig, the dance club. Well, it was the next weekend. When I went back, because we're just doing weekend work, weekend stuff. So the following weekend, I told my partners what I had seen. I didn't care if they laughed at me or not. I mean, they did. Some of them ridiculed me. They laughed, and they would call me Crazy Chaney. And, you know, and when you had law enforcement training and stuff like that, you know, you learn not to get so upset or uptight just because somebody's calling you names. Or, matter of fact, they teach you to take a nice, peaceful approach when you got an aggressive person come at you. That's why I always use the power of voice, and I've calmed down many situations and kept things peaceful. So they're just sitting there, you know, laughing at me. And then later on, my lieutenant and my other partner, who were pretty much close to concerning work, my lieutenant tells me, he says, you know what, he says, like, I believe you, because my dad, one night, it was in the Calusa area, some back roads. There's a lot of back roads with farmland and fields. But he said his dad was driving down the road and saw, I don't recall what it was, some weird creature, and it flew. It was standing in the middle of the road, and then it lifted up with, like, wings, like bat wings or something like that, and it flew off. The one that really grabbed my interest was my partner, when he told me his dad, lo and behold, in the town of Oroville, where I'd seen my Dogman, his dad had a nice big ranch, and they had like cows. Something was attacking their cows. Well, one night he grabs a shotgun, my partner's dad did, grabbed a shotgun and went out there to keep an eye on his cows, and comes across a 6-foot Dogman-like creature, but with glowing red eyes. So I didn't see that in the Dogman that I've seen. It had like amber yellow eyes, but I lost sight of that when it went to all fours, and that's when I was like locked in on the head shape and the shoulders, and it was just really bizarre to see something like that. So my partner's dad, as my partner was explaining it, was that this one had like glowing red eyes, and I guess that's very rare in a few cases. Maybe it's just people are thinking it's red eyes because when the flashlight hits the eyes, you know, they just automatically think, maybe in their perception, because they were shocked at the time, that they think it's red eyes. That's how I kind of figured that out. But it was interesting that he told me the fact that this was in Oroville, which made me, you know, like I said, I did some research, and I guess we'll get into that part about what happened to some 3 young men above Lake Oroville, if you're ready for that.
I am. Go ahead and tell us about that if you don't mind.
Well, after my sighting, and then the following weekend when I told my partners about it, and then my lieutenant and one of my partners telling me their stories, the whole time I was doing research, checking into Oroville area, I mean, I did everything, missing children, missing persons cases, whatever I could find just related to high strangeness. Well, I came across a Bigfoot reporting website, and I don't remember the name of it, but in it, it says that 3 young men, and this is the Bigfoot investigator to that website, did the report, went out to Oroville, and it said that 3 young men were on like a dirt road above Lake Oroville, and they're just cruising along until they come to a stop because there's a dog laying in the middle of the road with its guts torn out. And this thing was torn open. They get out, and being, 3 young men, I think they're like 16 to 21 years old. One of them grabs a stick and pokes at it, and they're just standing there looking at the dog. And I think they're getting ready to remove it, put it off to the side of the road. When suddenly, they hear snarling and growling, and they look off to their right at the woods, and they said it was a werewolf that came charging out of the trees towards them. They jumped in their car, and they sped off on this dirt road. They're doing about 35 miles per hour, and this creature was running alongside their car until they picked up speed, and then it stopped chasing them. So now I didn't feel alone in my Dogman sighting. I was, relieved.
Misery loves company. I can't blame you for feeling better knowing that other people have seen these things, but it's a fact. Misery loves company. When people find out that other people have seen Dogmen too, it always seems to make them feel better, and I understand why.
Well, my gosh, we're out there. Like I said, we're not You know, like doing, you know, we're not like your security guard, you know, we're like doing tactical stuff. We're out there crawling in dirt, using night vision and FLIR thermal vision, binoculars, and, you know, we're catching hard criminals. They're packing guns, machetes. I mean, I've been shot at 2 different occasions. One was at a high school. But, just to remind you guys, this was back in, when this happened? This was 2012 and like 2011. Yeah, that's right. So we're doing this very serious nature type work, and we're actually arresting people. You know, we didn't mess around. And sometimes we had to get aggressive with these guys, you know, because we're talking about, like, you'd be out in the middle of a walnut orchard, you know, you're hiding up in a tree, or you're the one that's, like, spotlighting or using night vision. Next you know, you see a leg dangle down from a tree, and you know it's a suspect, a walnut thief that's hiding up in a tree. We've been startled before because we're walking through the rows of trees, and next you know, I think one of my partners had gotten jumped by one of these walnut thieves who was hiding up in a tree. And it was a woman. She just jumped right out of the tree at him and stuff, and yeah, they got her. Another unfortunate thing is you got homeless people living down there too. And some of these homeless people are families that got kids. We weren't worried about those ones. We were worried about the homeless single men at the time, and for good reason. They were packing rusty machetes, survival knives, and we had to watch out for that. They had axes. You know, they had the, like, little camps set up. Sometimes they would get sophisticated and would have, like, a gas generator, and would have Christmas tree lights set up. Fortunately, they were on the farmer's property, in which we're contracted and assigned to protect that property. And we had this thing where they were kind of cool to be there until we caught them stealing walnuts, you know. Now, when I mean steal walnuts, I mean stealing walnuts. It was just a grocery bag of walnuts. We let it go because we know they were just trying to eat. No, I'm talking about when they're bringing in a car or pickup truck, and the whole entire back of that pickup truck is full of walnuts because they've been pulling walnuts from the ground or from the trees and throwing it in there. Sometimes it would come across like 2 to 3 foot tall rucksacks worth of walnuts. And that's a felony, by the way, right there, because walnuts are worth hundreds of dollars. And so we're talking about actually $1,000, $2,000 or more in walnuts being stolen when we come across these people doing it. And so they would get arrested and charged with a felony for doing it. But I've come across a few, and it was the ones that were just trying to feed their kids. You know, they would have like 1 or 2 grocery bags, and you know, they'd be scared, and it was sad, really sad. It really affected me, you know, to see that these kids are down here, you know, and they're just trying to eat, and I would let them go. I'm like, yeah, cool. And the entire company was cool about it. Even the farmer, he's like, if it's just a bag or 2, you know, that's fine from time to time, you know. I was really scared for these kids because of seeing the Dogman and having an incident, which reminds me, when he had Bear on. Now, that's a cool dude, and Kumbo, too. Now, I enjoyed the episode with Bear because they talked about when he walked out from the woods to the edge of the field and looked off to his right and saw, like, the Dogman, and it screamed. It just raised the hair on my body because back in 2010, I was at the Sutter Bypass fishing at night. By the way, I don't fish at night no more. I just can't do it. But this Sutter Bypass was another location that we had to protect, and it's one of the locations where I was shot at by a teenager, and unfortunately that teenager's in prison. But Sutter Bypass is next to the small town Sutter and the Sutter Buttes. I was out there on the other side, the more western side. There's a little area, and it has like a little bridge. And I'm sitting out there, and I just caught a pike minnow, which is an invasive fish species at the time. It still may be. And all of a sudden, there's like splashing in water about 100 feet going southward down this creek. And it kept splashing even harder. I didn't understand at the time. Then I would hear like I don't know, something hitting the tree, like tree knocking. And then all of a sudden, right behind me in this field, it's a rice paddy field behind me, and it's dark. I hear this loud scream, which sounded like a woman screaming for her life, but high-pitched, and it wasn't right. It was very creepy, and so I got on the phone, called my wife, told her what's been going on, and she says, get out of there. Well, the interesting thing is, this is like 2 years later, coming back into 2012 now. We're doing just south of the walnut orchards at this construction site in the dark, and there's a lot of coyotes there, and that's the area where they would creep up on you, or you would see a mountain lion or a bobcat. But my partner and I were standing there talking in the dark. All of a sudden, we hear this loud scream. And I'm like, that's the same scream I heard back in 2010 at the Sutter Bypass. It's just like the way Bear described it. And that's why, like I said before, it raised the hair on my body, because I didn't know it was related to possibly coming from a dog man. You know, and it just, you knew it wasn't from an animal, because you know about the animals in the area that you're to be contracted in to protect. And so we hear this scream, and my partner snaps his head right at me in the direction of the scream, and he goes, what was that? And I'm looking that way. I'm like, I don't know. But in my mind, I didn't want to say anything, you know, because of the last time I got ridiculed by my partners from the last company I was with, doing the Chico runs and all that. All of a sudden, I hear scuffling behind me, and I look behind me. It's my partner. I mean, he's carrying a Glock 40, you know. He's running to his car, scared. He swings his door open hard. I mean, it was hilarious if you would see it. But yeah, it kind of irritated me and annoyed me, pissed me off that he would leave me out there hanging like that. And he jumps in his car and slams that door shut. And this is a nice car, and I was surprised that he slammed the door shut like that. It was very loud. And you could hear the door locks just click. And he was sitting there looking at me, and I think I gave him the finger, and I jumped in my car. And I did likewise. I just shut the door and locked the doors, and I kept looking in that direction. I grabbed the night vision and was looking, and then we made it through the night. But we were doing like 12-hour shifts. We were doing some serious hard hours in the night.
Is that the same partner who was out on duty with you that one night when the 3 kids approached him in a bad way?
Oh, yeah. That was not the same partner. This was my partner. I brought him over to the company that I moved over to in February 2012. He was the one that told me about his dad's property in Orville and coming across the red-eyed, glowing wolf man that was harassing their cattle, scratching and biting on them, I guess. So this partner of mine I brought over to the new company I was with has a pretty good reputation with local law enforcement. He was on the other side of the river. I can talk about this. This was in Yuba City. It was at Shanghai Bend. He was posted at the construction site there. I'm on the other side, in Oliver's side of the river. And this is when my partner and I had heard the scream, and he ran to his car, and I jumped in my car. This is like a week or two later. My partner is on the other side of the river at Shanghai Bend. He calls me up on the cell phone. You know, this is not something you're going to talk about over the radio, which we had dispatch and radios and stuff like that. And he calls me on the cell phone and he says, hey, Chaney, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what's up, man? And he's like, I just had 3 kids, 3 boys. They must be like 6 to 8 years old. I mean, they're like too young to be out here at night in the dark. But there's homes right there, you know, brand new homes and stuff like that. So they probably live in that neighborhood. And there's like a levee. So once you get on the levee, you're on this like narrow strip of wooded area in the river. And at Shanghai Bend, you can, at times when the water goes down, you could cross and get over to the side where I was at, which was thicker with woods and a bigger area, you know, with the trees and all that, and brush. The street boys tell him, and they were shaking, they were scared, they were crying. They had to calm the boys down. They said they just seen a werewolf. And I was like, no way. And he's like, remember what you saw back in Orville? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, these boys are telling me they just saw a werewolf, and they're serious. They're shaking. They're scared. They're crying. I'm like, well, escort them. I said, get them up to the levee and watch them as they go down on the other side of the levee to the houses. And I think he did, you know, to make sure they're safe. I've been on that side of the river, too, protecting the construction site over there, and it seems a little bit more creepy, you know, but I felt relieved because you had the houses and all that. But where I was out on Oliver side, you're getting help very fast if bad things were to hit the fan.
With all the dogmen and other strange things these people around you are saying that they're seeing in your area, that must be an area that's got a community of dogmen and other cryptids around. If these other things, these strange things people are claiming that they're seeing are really there and they really did see them for whatever reason.
There's just something very strange about the whole business of dogmen. It's like they get seen, and then at times they don't want to be seen. But yet at times they get seen by people, and we get, I guess, new witnesses all the time, you know, and, you know, I was reading about the dogmen stuff, and I noticed that most of it seemed more centralized in the Wisconsin and Michigan area. But in California, you know, I'm like, no way, not out here. And, you know, I did find more reports in Southern California. I think we're a year or two older than mine. And like I said, the one with 3 young men on that dirt road above Lake Orville, that actually happened in 1997, because I read the date on that. And so, you know, it just makes you wonder. But then again, I look, you know, through Google Maps, I look at the area, and I'm like, okay, if you go towards the east, you're going to run into foothills and then up into the mountains. You know, we're talking about Plumas National Forest, the Sierra Nevadas, a lot of Bigfoot sightings. And Bigfoot, if I saw Bigfoot, I would not have a hard time with that. Matter of fact, while on the job, I've had city inspectors and town and county supervisors from like Orville tell me so many times while driving on the highways at night or the roads in Orville, they would see a Bigfoot running across the road, but they just too afraid to talk about it to others, you know, because you get ridiculed, and especially when you're in that position, you know, that authority. Hey, I just saw Bigfoot. Oh, okay, let's go get this guy a psychological exam. Matter of fact, I might as well go into the one, if you're ready, about Collins Lake, the woman I was assigned to protect.
Sure.
Yeah, that was interesting. That's where I had my first and only so far thing with Bigfoot. So I had my thing February 2011 with the Dogman. Well, this is February 2012, and like I said, I just joined this new company wearing all green BDUs and tactical and all that, and I brought my partner over to the company I'm with. My first assignment, I'm not going to give her name to protect her identity, but she was I guess a known artist out of San Francisco, but she lives at a house above Lake Collins, or Collins Lake, and apparently my boss is, one's a retired deputy, you know, sheriff deputy, and the other one's an active police officer, but they gave me the report. They wanted me to go up there because of my experience and training of being out in the woods and stuff like that at the time. They sent me out there telling me that this woman is being harassed by a couple of guys. Her, you know, fence, and she had like a metal fence. Some of it was barbed wire. It was very nice self-defense. Problem is that the tops would be bent down. Locks on her gates would be broken off. Rocks thrown at her house. And I'm like, okay. You know, my bosses are telling me, they're like, as soon as you see a guy step onto her property, you take him down fast and hard and arrest him. I'm like, yeah, I got no problem with that. Here's the problem, though. It was my first night going out there. It was about, I had to be there at 9 p.m. until like 5 o'clock in the morning. It was around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I started hearing tree knocking. And I forgot to mention this woman had 3 pit bulls, which I made friends with really fast because these pit bulls were big. and they would keep me company outside because I had to hide in the shadows in the dark, lurking around on this woman's like 2-acre property. It was like 2 or 3 acres. It was pretty sizable. So I'm like creeping around in the dark and stuff, and these pit bulls, you know, they would, you know, kind of hang out with me, and then suddenly they would run up to the fence, and, you know, they would do the low growling, and then they would run up to another part of the fence doing the low growling, and that's when I started hearing tree knocking, and then there was some rocks thrown, and then I would see movement, and I'm like, okay, there's like 2 of them, and I'm thinking these are guys, but that's the problem. It wasn't guys. It was Bigfoot, and there were 2 of them. They were being territorial towards this woman. I got a glimpse of one of them. It was just like a dark mass, but he was tall. I mean, he was just tall. I just knew it wasn't a man. It was just tall, and the tree knocking and stuff. And I remembered watching Finding Bigfoot. I got into watching Finding Bigfoot because of that Dogman sighting I had, you know, and was curious about Bigfoot back in 2011. So I learned about the tree knocking and all that. But here's the funny part, though. When I got off 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, the woman did not want me to leave. She was scared to death. She just did not want me to go. But I had to go, you know, my shift was over, and I felt bad, but I got home, and my bosses called me up, and they're like, okay, so how did it go up there? I said, oh, no worries. It's not some guys harassing the woman. I said, it's Bigfoot. And they were like, what? Well, the next day they called me in and had me drug tested. I mean, I couldn't blame them, I guess, but they had me drug tested. 3 weeks later, they ended up dropping her as a client. I guess my other partners are not saying, you know, but I think they pretty much came up with the same conclusion that I did. They just didn't tell the bosses, but they figured out that the woman's not being harassed by any guy, you know, so.
That poor woman. I can only imagine what she must have gone through. That's horrible.
Well, what was scary, too, was, you know, it was cold and windy, and then it died down. But I had all green BDUs on. I didn't have a jacket at the time, and I wasn't armed. I didn't have a firearm on me. I just had my PR-24 sliding handle baton, pepper spray, and handcuffs, and a stun gun device. You know, I didn't get my taser gun until later, and the taser gun is the one that's a taser gun where it actually shoots out up to 15 feet or 25 feet. It's the police model and shocks you. But at that time, yeah, I wasn't armed. I just did not have the gun until months later.
Yeah, that's not good. Not a good scene.
But I'm very good with the hands and taking somebody down, and I would do whatever it takes.
Well, against Bigfoot like that, that's not going to go very far, to say the least.
No, well, when it came to Bigfoot, if that thing would have approached me, I would have been like the woman. I would have been inside her house, crying with her, being scared, probably.
I don't think anyone could blame you if you did. That's understandable there. Now, moving on, Anthony, you were telling me about the Maidu having a legend about a big, hairy creature that is somewhat Bigfoot-like in appearance. Tell us about that.
Well, back in February 2011 when I seen the Dogman, I mean, like, as soon as I got home, I jumped on the computer, got on the internet, and I woke up my wife, too, and I told her about it, but we talked more the next day when I had woke up around 2 o'clock in the afternoon after I got some sleep. I came across the Native Americans, the Maidu tribe, out here in the Oroville area, the Yuba Sutter, Butte counties, and they have what they call the Ko-Nuji. And the Ko-Nuji, if I'm pronouncing that right, it's a K-O-H-U-N-E-J-E. And what that means is big, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature that eats human children. Yeah, human children. And then that's when I discovered the works of David Paulides about these missing children from national parks. And I don't blame him for not admitting or expressing his opinion what he thinks is making these children disappear, but I can only just come up with that conclusion on my own and not on the behalf of David Paulides, who does wonderful works, by the way.
Oh, I love his work. I can't get enough of it. Every time a new Missing 411 comes out on YouTube, I'm on it.
Yeah, I'll watch or listen to the shows on YouTube because, like I said, you take advantage of resources, especially when they're free to you, like Google Maps, the works of others who are doing research.
Going back to that encounter that you had along the side of the road that night, Anthony, how much would you say that dogman that you saw that night weighed?
Oh, I put thought to that. I'm 6 foot, and yet I weigh 250 to 270 pounds that time, and I'm pretty athletic, and I'm built. I'm not like buff, I'm built and well fed in the belly area thanks to my wife. But on that note of myself being 6 foot and around 250 pounds, and looking at that 9 to 10 foot creature, I said that he's got to be 600 to 800 pounds. It was big. I wish it was a Bigfoot. And I forgot to mention this, but when I come to a stop, I actually opened up my driver's side door, got out, and I put my foot, on that step part next to, my driver's seat and kind of lifted myself up and watched it. And when it stopped to look at me, that's when I got back in my car. So I thought I was going to turn around and come back and let me know, hey, we got a problem now. You're like too inquisitive or something. I just wasn't taking any chances, and actually that highway is 55 miles per hour, the top speed limit. I ended up doing 80 to get home.
Seeing how big, strong, and fast these things are, it's not exactly confidence-inspiring, is it?
When you see this creature, the best thing you can do, I would say run away, but after listening to Bear, what he said, it makes sense, just kind of try to back out of there tactfully as possible. Just back away, walk backwards if you have to, maybe kind of eyeing around to make sure he doesn't have a buddy with him or something that's creeping up on you, because I've heard the story about the couple in Maine where they're sitting on their porch at night, they like to drink coffee, and it was dark, and they have a spotlight, and they like to look at the deer that come in their yard, until the husband looks over at the wife and told her to get inside the house. Because apparently, when he spotlighted, there was 3 dogmen in front of them, creeping up on all fours, and he looked off to the right, and there was 2 more, for a total of 5 dogmen creeping up on him. And that just scared me. I was like, no way. If they're being tactical, or if we think like animal instincts, they're very intelligent. They know what they're doing, and you got to think about that. Their sight, their senses, especially their sight. I'm using night vision in the dark just to catch these people at times. And these things, they don't need night vision because their eyes are night vision. There's just so many factors you have to play in your mind, and I'm just glad I had that kind of training in law enforcement and anti-terrorism security, because it just, gave me that train of thought, those thought processes, and I would always have an eye view. Now that I'm not in, I retired. I retired because, it was that school shooting with those kids. It really affected me bad, and I pretty much hanged up the guns, and I quit. The company did not want me to leave. They just did not want me to go. They were like, please, you're our best officer. We need you. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. And they're like, well, why? Why do you want to quit? And, and I just made up excuses. I couldn't tell them that because of those kids at that school that got shot up by that psycho. It affected me so bad. I was sick in the gut. I didn't want nothing to do with guns, and I just, so, since retirement, I got into, because I'm very creative, so I got into, photography and book writing, and, I don't have to think tactical as hard as I had to when I worked, crawling in the ground and all that stuff, using night vision. I'm more relaxed, and my wife's noticed that. She's like, you're more relaxed, but yet you're jumpy. Like a cat's in the 3-foot brush in our field, making this scurry sound, and I jump. I look over there quick. and make sure it's not some 7 to 10 foot tall dog man looking over my 6 foot wooden fence at me, getting ready to leap on me or something.
Well, considering what you've seen and been through, I don't think anyone could blame you for being jumpy. Now that you know that they're out there, that's going to change anyone. Before we move on, I want to make sure I don't miss this point here. On the YouTube version of this show, I'm going to post some nighttime photography work that Anthony has done. When you have a chance to look at these photos, you're going to see why I was blown away by their quality. They're amazing.
Thank you. They are, like I said, I had to find something, not just creative, but I had to find a different avenue of type of work I could do, and it's slow right now, and that's fine, because the most reward I'm getting out of doing the book writing and photography is that my kids can look up at me and say, my dad's an author, he's wrote some books and he does photography, because they wanted me to quit doing my job the night I had gotten shot at the first time. And then a year later, I got shot at again the second time, which was a teenager who went to prison. My wife and kids were freaked out. They did not want me to continue working the type of job I did. And I was like, I know. I said, it comes with the job. I'm trained to handle those situations. They didn't care. They just wanted me to quit. So that's what led me up to doing the photography work I do. And I'm just happy to say that I don't like to claim I'm a pro. I mean, we're talking about digital cameras and Photoshop, and most of the work I do, I don't even have to Photoshop. I mean, the camera's doing the job itself. And I enjoy the works of pro and amateur photography. It's very fun and something good to teach your kids to do. And rather than taking them out shooting a gun. Don't get me wrong. I have nothing against guns. Guns are good to have when they're in the hands of responsible people.
It's time to wrap the show up here, Anthony. Do you have any closing comments?
I do. I think it could be some pretty good advice for people out there. Just remember there's all sorts of free resources out there you can use, and take advantage of it. Don't be doubtful, no matter how bizarre the story is of, you got a loved one or brother, sister, or friend that comes up to you and said they saw something very strange. And most importantly, this is something I learned, and everybody knows this one. When I was a kid, my parents used to tell me this, especially when I would get scared of the dark in my room. Monsters are not real. They don't exist. Don't worry. Well, I do the opposite. My children, I tell them that monsters are real. Whether they come in the form of a psychopath who's got a gun shooting up a school full of children, or a dog man out in the field or in the woods. That's something I teach my kids. I tell them about it, that monsters are real. I'm very open with them about it, and some friends and definitely my family. I like to remind them every year about my sighting that I seen in Oroville. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you so much for coming on, Anthony. You've been a great guest. It's been great talking with you.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate it. Don't be a stranger, okay?
Oh, I won't. I'll stay in touch with emails. I'll send you some new photographs. Plus, I have those, the websites I sent to you personally. You could check those out. So feel free to do that.
I'll do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate it, and you're very cool to talk with. You ask good questions. I like that. You're very professional.
Well, thanks for the good words. We'll stay in touch. If anything ever comes up where I could help you in any way, please do let me know.
Okay, I will. Thanks again, Vic.
Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you want to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.